We're going to give you a license to make Patriots. That's pretty cool, right? It's an escalation, but it's also an escalation that can help lead to an end.
Strikes on Russian oil refineries are a necessary escalation that will help end the war. Ukraine will receive a license to produce Patriot missiles. The US is finally ready to close the skies over Ukraine, and the pressure on President Putin is only increasing. American President Donald Trump pleasantly surprised Ukrainians after meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky at the NATO summit in Ankara. The rhetoric of the American president has changed dramatically, and now he is convinced that additional pressure must be put on Vladimir Putin. Although he is convinced that the Russian dictator wants to end the war and supposedly will not violate the peace deal if Volodymyr Zelensky agrees to it. Donald Trump also announced his visit to Ukraine, though not now but a little later. He also asked whether Zelensky would still agree to fly to Moscow to meet with Putin. And he added that he would call Putin a little later to convey all the conditions put forward by Zelensky. These were put forward during the closed part of the meeting. Zelensky на закрытой части. And on this matter, Western media are reporting that Ukraine, without many noticing, rejected Donald Trump's peace plan of 28 points and built its own strategy, which worked and which Donald Trump now really likes. But what is also important is that after the closed meeting, even the president of Turkey, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, stated that he would continue military support for Ukraine and would put pressure on Vladimir Putin to encourage peace. So in this episode, let's discuss it while it's still fresh. The results of the meeting between Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky at the NATO summit in Ankara and what consequences this meeting will have. My name is Alexei Pecci. Let's discuss this topic together. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to the channel, like this episode, and leave any comment under this video. I would be very grateful to you for that.
I thought this would be a good time for President Zelensky and me to meet, and we'll see what we can do. But we've built a good relationship. Hard to believe, right? From the Oval Office to now, I think we've developed a very good relationship. And
this is not the end.
No, this is not. This is going to be the beginning, maybe. Yeah, it's just the beginning.
So today, July 8th in Ankara, the long-awaited meeting between Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky took place, which included an open press conference and a closed session. In short, the meeting between the two leaders is taking place after the North Atlantic Council meeting of NATO heads of state and government, which means that the position of all alliance members is more than clear. Well, for example, in the final statement of the NATO leaders, Russia is called a long-term threat to Euro-Atlantic security and stability. To contain the threats, the alliance countries announced new defense purchases totaling more than $50 billion and also committed to expanding collective production capacities to accelerate innovation in the military-industrial complex. Significantly, all of this will be done without US involvement. In addition, in 2026, the Allies, again I emphasize these are European countries and Canada, without the US, commit to providing 70 billion euros for military equipment, assistance, and training for Ukraine. This is another additional package. Moreover, the alliance members confirmed their readiness to maintain an equivalent level of support in 2027 as well. Everyone but Donald Trump is actively supporting Ukraine, leaving Trump only to act as a peacemaker or mediator, since he can't influence his allies' actions against Russia. That is, Trump, even if he really wants to support Putin right now, or try to exert some kind of pressure, he simply can't influence the actions of his allies against Russia anymore. It doesn't work anymore because Canada is already pursuing its own completely independent defense strategy separate from the US. Well, if you missed it, yesterday we were just discussing this, that even the airborne early warning aircraft used to belong to NATO, now the Americans are abandoning them and ordering Swedish ones instead. At the meeting with Trump, Zelensky immediately stated that the main topics of the negotiations are air defense, the peace process, and the drone deal. That is, a deal on drones. The president of Ukraine said he wants to discuss key details of cooperation between the two countries. Donald Trump, for his part, spoke a lot about how he plans to achieve an end to the war and the long-awaited peace. Well, the first thing that surprised many was Trump's statement that he actually welcomes Ukrainian strikes deep into Russia. Moreover, according to Trump, Ukrainian long-range strikes on Russian territory could lead to the end of the war. So, a journalist asked Trump to comment on Ukraine's long-range strikes on Russia. In response, the American leader gave the floor to U.S. Secretary of State Mark Rubio. I'll pause for a moment because something specific came up. There's been some confusion, and many Russian and Ukrainian language media outlets misunderstood what happened and attributed some statements to Mark Rubio. A Ukrainian journalist asked whether Ukraine and the United States are discussing Ukraine's ability to strike deep into Russia so that Russia would see how difficult it is to defend its own airspace, and whether Washington hopes that such actions will open up space for negotiations to end the war. Donald Trump apparently misunderstood the emphasis of the Ukrainian journalist, although in principle everything was clear. Well, or he simply didn't hear the question and asked Mark Rubio to explain what it was about. Marco Rubio eventually said that the journalist was asking for an assessment of Ukraine's ability to reach deep inside Russia. And then he added on his own that it has indeed become more difficult for Russians to defend their airspace lately. And then, after those words, Donald Trump spoke up and made a statement. Quote, "This is an escalation, but it's an escalation that could lead to the end of the war." So, as you can see, the US is not at all opposed to Ukraine continuing to increase its strikes on Russia. But I want to emphasize, there were no promises that we would give Ukraine missiles so it could strike Russian territory more effectively.
President, what is your assessment on Ukraine's strike on Russian oil refineries and military factories?
Where are you from?
Ukraine.
Then phrase the question differently.
Please, Ukraine delivered a lot of strikes on Russian military factories and on oil refineries, and they ran out of gas.
Marco, why don't you answer since you're involved? Yeah, no.
I think what you're discussing is the ability of Ukraine to reach deep inside of Russia.
And conduct strikes.
I think that's one of the dynamics that's changed in this war over the last few months, and that is that the Russians are finding it more difficult to defend their own airspace. And what we hope that means is that it's going to create the space now to negotiate the end of this war.
It's an escalation, but it's also an escalation that can help lead to an end.
The Ukrainian military, well...
Just at this point, there was news that the Ukrainian military attacked oil and military facilities in several regions of Russia. They hit the Saratov oil factory, Rosneft, the Krasnodar compressor station, the military airfield in Borisoglepsk, 230 kilometers from Voronezh, as well as 2 oil tankers near Taganrog, and an oil and chemical plant in Nizhnekamsk. And I emphasize, it was all in one night. Well, the armed forces of Ukraine added that in the last 2 days they had already attacked 19 tankers who were trying to deliver fuel to Crimea. Therefore, the Russians have already started using water trucks and milk trucks to somehow disguise the supply of gasoline to the peninsula, but the question here is logical. But Russia is also continuing to attack, and there is no defense against these attacks, in particular ballistic missiles. Due to the lack of missiles for the Patriot, Ukrainian military forces are forced to change their tactics for countering air attacks. Experts already say that the Patriot has been switched from automatic to manual operation. This means that the Patriot, instead of automatically detecting the target and launching 2 missiles at it, that's how the Patriot works, that's how Patriots work. In manual mode, the military themselves look for targets and launch not 2, but only 1 missile to save money. The main reason for the decrease in the effectiveness of repelling attacks is the acute shortage of missiles for the Patriot. Well, here, Trump has also resumed his war with Iran, and it is obvious that these are there and now. The operator of the Patriot missile system retains the discretion to determine which targets to engage and in what order. Accordingly, Ukrainian military forces are forced to assess the value of aerial objects so as not to waste scarce and expensive missiles on cheap Russian drones and to strike exclusively valuable and dangerous targets. Well, there is a breakthrough on this. This is the news that I personally expected the most and wondered whether it would happen or not. Next, I will immediately quote Donald Trump, then we will discuss it. I think you will understand everything yourself. The bird told me that today we will discuss with Zelensky that we will provide Ukraine with the means to manufacture Patriot. We will show them how to do it. In fact, this is a very complex process, but you will quickly understand this complexity, and we are just talking about this. And the company that produces them and is now building 4 factories will be able to do this in 2 to 3 months. If you order a Patriot now, you have to wait a long time. It's the same with Tomahawks. We have a lot of certain equipment, but it's considered elite. So one of the things we will talk about is that we will provide Ukraine with a license to produce this technology. That's cool, right? So you can't complain that we're not doing enough for you. We will say do it yourself.
Don't say a little birdie told me this about the fact that we will give them the right to make Patriots. We will show them how to do it. It is very complex, actually. But, all of the companies will figure out the complexity quickly. And we are talking about that. And we will. The company that makes them, which is building now 4 plants, all our companies, we can do it in 2 or 3 months if you buy a Patriot. Now, you have to wait a long time. With Tomahawks, we have a lot of certain equipment, but with what they call elite equipment, and you don't necessarily need elite equipment for a war. But so one of the things we're going to be talking about is we're going to give you a license to make Patriots. That's pretty cool, right? This way you can't complain that we're not giving them enough. I'd say make
Yourself is really a real breakthrough for today. I emphasize all over There are only 2 countries that received such licenses for the production of Patriot missiles outside the USA. This is Japan and Germany. That is, let's say so, all over the world. Only the USA, Germany, and Japan produce these PAC-3 missiles, but in Germany, I emphasize, they have only just started building up production capacity. But for Ukraine, the US promises to help quickly establish production of PAC-3 missiles, which are specifically designed to protect against ballistic missiles. Russians. Well, and it's important to note that it was the Ukrainian delegation that attended the G7 summit in early June. In addition, Trump made a statement that was quite surprising. Donald Trump admitted that he could declare a no-fly zone over Ukraine. Answering a journalist's question during a press conference with Zelensky, Trump said that he could make a decision to establish a no-fly zone over Ukraine if it would be appropriate and help end the conflict. Here is a very unclear point, and I think that a bit later we will get more clarification. Because Trump went on to express hope that it wouldn't be necessary and that a peace agreement would be reached without it. Trump also added that after the war is over, Ukraine will receive all necessary security guarantees from the United States of America in case of another attack. What does this mean? Well, on one hand, it could mean that as part of the security guarantees, the United States of America might fully take on the protection of Ukrainian airspace from future Russian attacks. That is not now, but only after the war is over and as part of the security guarantees. But on the other hand, pay attention to Trump's rhetoric, which suggests that if it helps to end the conflict, he is ready to declare a no-fly zone. That is, this means closing the Ukrainian airspace. This is what Ukraine has been asking for since the very beginning of the full-scale war, and here it's still not entirely clear what exactly he is really ready to do, but again, the rhetoric itself is already appealing. So at the very least, well, there isn't a categorical no. Trump and Zelensky also discussed peace initiatives, and according to Trump, work on a peace agreement to end the war is ongoing, but the process is not easy. The US president compared the war in Ukraine to a fight between 2 people in a park, quote, "Sometimes you might need to let them fight." But Trump forgot to mention one important point here, which Western media are recalling today. Moreover, Trump's favorite newspaper, the New York Post, is writing about it today in a completely blunt manner. Zelensky rejected the US peace plan and proposed a new approach to ending the war with Russia to Trump. Let me say in advance that, in fact, when Trump said this is like a fight between 2 people in a park and you just need to let them fight, he didn't quite understand that yes, he gave them the opportunity to fight, but in the end, Ukraine radically changed the rules of the game. As reported by the New York Post, Ukraine has completely moved away from the 28-point draft plan to end the war with the Russian Federation, and now, taking into account the changed conditions on the battlefield, is seeking a more favorable agreement. If you forgot, let me remind you that we're talking about the 28-point peace initiative that was personally promoted by Donald Trump after negotiations with Putin in Alaska. Well, I'm sure that hardly anyone remembers this plan at all anymore, but let me remind you that last fall we discussed the 28-point peace plan together. Do you remember that? So, the New York Post admits that Ukraine completely threw out this plan and totally changed the game. And here's what the New York Post writes. Here's a quote. The lack of trilateral negotiations happened against the backdrop of Ukraine strengthening its position on the battlefield, which, according to Ukrainian ambassador to the US Olha Stefanishina, gives us grounds to think more creatively about ending the war. At the same time, Ukrainian officials see Trump's growing dissatisfaction with Putin as an opportunity to put pressure on the Kremlin to end the war. Another source told the publication that the plan now is to shift attention to new pressure tactics aimed at forcing Moscow to reconsider its position. And now, on the sidelines, in the corridors of the NATO summit, European diplomats admit that almost a month ago, at the G7 summit, European leaders were already urging Trump to view Ukraine as a strategic asset rather than a burden. And the publication notes that, in addition to ending the war, Zelensky also stressed to Trump today that Ukraine has become indispensable for NATO's long-term security. And here is the first result. Donald Trump announced today that the United States of America will purchase Ukrainian drones. Here is the quote. "We will buy their Ukrainian drones. We manufacture drones, we make excellent drones, but they have the ability to produce them in large quantities." So, you see, finally Trump admitted that yes, Ukraine has cool drones and Americans will buy them for their own army. Besides that, Trump suddenly started calling Zelensky practically his best partner. Here's another quote. "I think it's a good time to meet with President Zelensky. We've developed a good relationship. Hard to believe, right? Since the Oval Office, we've developed a good relationship, and this is just the beginning. This country, Ukraine, has a great future. Such a beautiful land, such wonderful assets, and such great people." Well, actually, after that, Trump added, quote, "We have a small interest in this country, you know, because we have land in this country where there are minerals. I look forward to taking advantage of this at the right moment. Well, I mean, remember the agreement on rare earth metals and, in general, the minerals that are found in Ukraine. It's a consortium for extracting these elements." Well, later Trump said that he regrets not being able to end Russia's war against Ukraine sooner because Putin and Zelensky are so complicated. But he added that Putin wants peace and he definitely won't deceive anyone and will stick to any peace agreement because it's him, Donald Trump, who will make it. Well, there is a certain naivety here, nevertheless. And here's another quote from Trump. "Vladimir Putin wants to see a resolution to the Ukrainian conflict. Well, we've resolved many wars, and this war, in my opinion, could be the easiest of all. But Putin is a complicated person. And this guy, I mean Zelensky, is also a complicated person. It's not the simplest, not the easiest thing. It requires a lot of commitment. We are already putting very strong pressure on President Putin. I don't think he likes what's happening. And I don't want to upset Zelensky, but everything I did with President Putin was fine. It was good. I don't think anything will be violated." Nevertheless, today Bloomberg gives its assessment, and they believe that Trump focused on Iran at the NATO summit and paid almost no attention to Ukraine. According to the agency, citing sources at the closed session of the NATO summit in Ankara, the US president did not give European allies any concrete promises regarding Ukraine. Trump also criticized Europe's migration policy, took a jab at Spain, brought up what he called the problem of uncontrolled migration on the continent, again demanded that Greenland be given to him, and so on. And so, before the meeting, European officials were hoping they could shift the American president's attention to the war in Ukraine. However, according to Bloomberg, they only received a general statement of support. Trump told the allies that the US is ready to continue selling weapons to European countries, which can then transfer them to Ukraine. But, as Donald Trump's speech showed, he is finally ready not to stand in the way of Ukraine and Europe getting what they want. Yes, the United States of America is not currently providing direct military assistance to Ukraine, but the US is ready to transfer, for example, the license to produce Patriot missiles to Ukraine, which was completely unimaginable just a couple of years ago. The US is not putting additional sanctions on Russia, but they are also not preventing Europe from doing so. The US has taken the position of a mediator who is ready to provide the tools and, as they say, step aside. In fact, this actually works in our favor. If Trump continues in the same way, Ukraine will prove to him more than once that his peace plans don't work. Let's just make this clear at the end. If Ukraine had agreed last fall to Donald Trump's 28-point peace plan, we would have capitulated long ago. But Ukraine did not agree. Hardly anyone even remembers that plan anymore, and Trump admits that Ukraine has gained leverage, and I emphasize all this happened without the help of the US. But again, as they say, we shouldn't dismiss Trump's achievements at this summit either, because there are certain indirect signs that he is still influencing events. For example, the president of Turkey, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, stated today that he intends to use Turkey's diplomatic channels to encourage Russia toward peace. And more importantly, Recep Tayyip Erdogan stated that Ankara will continue contributing through the International Plural Initiative to finance Ukrainian armaments. And next, I will give you a very important quote from Recep Tayyip Erdogan. We share Mr. Trump's peaceful vision regarding the war in Ukraine. I express my support for the initiative to create lists of Ukraine's priority needs. In addition to the military support we provide to Ukraine from our own national reserves, we will continue contributing through Plural. By supporting Ukraine, we are also using our communication channels to encourage Russia toward peace. I appreciate the decisive stance demonstrated by my friend Mr. Trump. As you can see, even the Turkish president has voiced a fairly clear position on Ukraine, again thanks to what the American president Mr. Trump is doing, who also calls Erdogan his friend and comrade. In general, I'll leave it at that. In the next episode, I will sum up the results of the NATO summit from a broader perspective, not just in the context of Russia's war against Ukraine, because there is also much to discuss there. So subscribe to the channel. Like this episode and click the bell so you get notifications about new episodes on this YouTube channel. Plus, today I also plan to have time to discuss with you the renewed war between the US and Iran, because Trump has already said outright that negotiations are over. Iran has also announced that it is leaving the negotiations. The war has officially resumed. That's it, I'll leave it at that. Write your opinion in the comments, subscribe to the channel. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.